Kevin Kwok is a member of our board of directors and brings deep experience as a biopharmaceutical executive to the Parkinson's community. Today, he is the head of patient engagement at Theravance Biopharma. He's been a speaker and patient advocate for several foundations and has been featured on national news programs and webcasts, speaking about living a high-impact life thanks to traditional therapies and a Zen aggressive lifestyle. And he's going to tell you all about that today. So happy to have you here, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here.
It's awesome to be here. So welcome from the Kwok kitchen. It's kind of catchy, right? Why don't we just start by saying this? You know, English is a very complex language. It's full of similes, metaphors, and broken rules, and phrases and slang that you just can't predict. So for someone who's not native, it's even hard for the native speaker. Take, for instance, the following phrase, we're all the same. We put our pants on one leg at a time. Well, let me tell you, in a COVID world, I have not put on dress pants in quite a while. So putting my pants on today was a little challenging. The other thing is, we are not the same. Michael J. Fox will often say, when you see one Parkinson's patient, you've seen one Parkinson's patient. And so I think with this, this in place, I'd like to begin my talk. I so wish I could have been with you all in Michigan. Like Mel, I'm from Michigan, but unfortunately in this COVID world, we've all been upended. And so instead you get me here from my house. I've named my talk, The Art of Mindful Pivoting in a COVID-19 Era. That's a little bit of a long phrase, but we'll get to each of those points in the course of the next 20 minutes. So I actually lived here in Michigan. My parents moved to Midland in the 70s. My brothers went to Dow High School, if you know where that is. They were avid athletes, and I was only an athlete wannabe. But I worked in a chemical plant in my summers there and attended the University of Michigan. Go Blue, right? I even brought my well-used pewter beer mug. Some of you in the audience may know this. In any case, I earned my Doctor of Pharmacy degree in 1986. I have very fond memories of Ann Arbor. You know, I grew up going to the big house, for football games. I went to Zingerman's all the time. But my most cherished memory are the songs of one of my favorite musicians, Bob Seger, a local Ann Arbor, Detroit person. Back then, I used to serenade potential dates with the song Night Moves. And that haunting song, Main Street, which I will come back to again, is something that Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band really brought to fame. Few people in west Mississippi actually know where that is, but I'll come back to that. My first job was in 1986 in Kalamazoo, so I've kind of transcended that whole I-94 corridor. So fast forward from 1986 to 2020, today, like you, I'm a person living with Parkinson's. My version of Bob Seger's Night Moves now is actually the ability to brush my teeth before I go to bed. Not very romantic and exciting, is it? The other thing is I've also become a professional patient advocate, and I'll get more into that in the course of today's conversation. As Mel said, I head up patient engagement for a Bay Area biopharmaceutical company. The name of the company is Theravance. You haven't heard about it yet, maybe, but you will. We're working actually in the field of Parkinson's on an investigational drug for low blood pressure, one of the symptoms that some Parkinson's patients face. If you've ever passed out after a meal like I have, it's a scary thing. Contact us separately and I can put you in touch with the right people. My company also just yesterday announced that it was going into human studies for a COVID-19 product. So we're all working feverishly to try to work two sides of my world, Parkinson's and also COVID-19. So oftentimes people ask me, who are not in the industry, why does it take so long to develop a drug and get it to market? Well, my response is it's one of the hardest industries to be in. Think about when Richard Nixon waged the war on cancer. That was what, in the 70s? And here we are now today with great advances. But it's taken us a long time to get here. And to mobilize an effort like Parkinson's or like COVID-19 overnight is really hard to do. Now, I have the fortune of having the best job in my company because I get to talk to people like you. My job is really understanding and talking to patients and learning about the patient burdens that we all go through. It's a movement actually that the FDA is moving towards, and I just feel very gifted because I get to turn my hobby into a job. So I'm also on the board of the Davis-Phinney Foundation. It's an association that I'm most proud of. It's maybe my proudest accomplishment next to raising 3 wonderful kids. I'll begin my story with a Parkinson's bio. Everyone should have their own story, and I'd ask you to think about it as you listen to mine, about how some of the things I talk about might apply in your lives. So I was diagnosed 12 years ago with Parkinson's. Initially, like all of you, I thought it was just some sports injury or something that was not enough exercise or not enough sleep. But I noticed that it was progressively getting worse. Back at that time, I was a 45-year-old young, sort of promising biopharmaceutical executive, with the world at my feet. I remember specifically when I realized this is not just a sports injury. I was asked to make a business pitch with only 12 hours notice in Singapore, and to meet my colleague from Germany there. And literally we had to mobilize overnight to get there. It was exhausting to travel there, but we won the pitch. I put my friend on a plane and then proceeded to actually seize up. I mean, it was so severe that I actually crawled down to the gym in the hotel and begged the massage therapist there, would you please work on me for half an hour? I've got to get on a plane tomorrow. Anyway, she worked on me kindly for 2 hours and said afterwards, sir, she goes, you actually felt like concrete when I was massaging you. Anyway, she managed to get me on the plane. I went home and then was quickly diagnosed by my primary care physician as having Parkinson's. So my outlook when I was diagnosed was actually a little bit different than what many other people go through. Rather than feeling like my world was falling apart, there was a lot of denial. I had friends who had just gone through brain cancer. My own grandfather had ALS. And I just recently had a young cousin who had a stroke. So I was thinking, if it's none of those, I'm going to be fine. And so I went on my merry way for a few years, kind of a happy-go-lucky kid. But that changed over time, and we'll come to that. Now, as I look back on those last 12 years, I reflect on how fast it's actually gone by and how much it's changed, which leads me to this conversation that I'm having with you today, the art of mindful pivoting. Now, some of you may know the TV show Kung Fu that had this star David Carradine, who played this Kung Fu master in the West. So, he would go through these flashbacks. So humor me while I have my first flashback right now. And I'm going back to the days of Ann Arbor and Bob Seger down on Main Street. Just a block from Main Street is a place that I spent a lot of my college days when I wasn't studying. It was the Asian martial arts studio. And I spent a lot of my days actually working out there. I'm trying to be the athlete that I never really was. My sensei, Mr. Carl Scott, gave me lots of words of wisdom and life lessons in the course of my years there. But one day he pulls me aside and gave me my best life lesson. He put me aside and he said, Kevin, he goes, you're a good martial artist. You work out really hard, but you're not great, which was shocking, of course. And I was like, but master, teach me the ways, right? And so he said this to me. He said, you know, in order to really fully gain control, you must be first willing to lose control. Now, I nodded my head, but I had no idea what he really meant. The art of losing control in order to gain control. I repeat that. What he really meant was you have to, this normal fight or flight syndrome where actually your catecholamines all come in, generally make you tighten up in times when you actually should be loose. Anyway, over time, I practiced, and I actually found there was some merit to that. And I realized that in order to really punch, you don't want to muscle it. You actually just want to flow with it. And actually, I'll tell you this, to this day, I can still hit a pretty mean right hook using that application. Anyway, I took that from martial arts to other sports. Unfortunately, I'm not a great mogul skier, but I'm trying to apply that principle there. I applied it to my career where every time I had a new job, I lost control in order to gain control in order to succeed. I used it in raising my children, but now I'm using it in my biggest challenge, and that's with Parkinson's. Now with Parkinson's, you might say, listen, Kevin, that's not an easy thing to do. I've already lost control, right? Well, yes, I would agree with you, but that's really the paradox here, right? Because the ultimate act of acceptance is actually relinquishing control. And by doing that, actually, my life in Parkinson's got so much better. I told, finally, after many years of trying to keep it secret, I told my employer, I admitted to my family, who I'd been somewhat macho with, you know, and to me, things just really paved my way for a pivot. Life was not the same, but actually got better through all of that. That was the first step in the act of mindful pivoting. The second part of my action steps that I think that worked for me is to self-advocate with veracity. Now, listen, you all have an entire lifetime to discover the nuances of living with Parkinson's. No one will know the disease better than you. We're not the same, as I said very early on. And the truth is, we're not even the same each day. From time to time, it's unpredictable how you're feeling. And you have to be honest with the people around you on what's going on in order to be a self-advocate. Perhaps this is one of my life shortcomings, because on this veneer of wanting to be macho and strong and a karate man that didn't bleed on the outside. Actually, this was one of my early downfalls. But listen, all of you have what is a PhD in Parkinson's. And what do I mean by PhD? Well, PhD, as I've been told by the FDA, stands for a personal history of disease. You are the expert in your own lives. And no one else, even doctors, can contest that, because only you know how you're feeling at the moment. In my own progression, I went from that happy-go-lucky kid, 12 years ago, to someone that was actually in an emotional prison. My medications went from just 2 or 3 times a day to Cinemet, 6 times a day in various dosage forms. They were adding other medications that just made me crawl out of my skin. And what Dr. Mapstone talked about earlier was a checklist of everything that he talked about today. I had insomnia, fatigue, depression, cognitive impairments. These were all things that I was going through, and I was still trying to manage a career and also raising kids. It was tough. In any case, the one thing that I had, and maybe it's a curse, a double-edged sword, was that I read the medical literature voraciously. It comes across my desk through work, and I would constantly take and flag those articles in Parkinson's. and I would bring them to my neurologist. I'm the doctor's nightmare in that respect, right? You know, this thought of, I was trained to understand that the term game changer in medications was in fact oftentimes hype versus hope. And every time I would bring these papers, like, should I be on nilotinib? Should I be on a calcium channel blocker? Should I be on a diabetes drug? My neurologist would politely pat me on the head and said, just keep exercising, because that's the only thing that really has been shown to make a difference. So anyway, 5 years into my disease or my diagnosis, the New England Journal of Medicine came out with a paper that talked about the early intervention using deep brain stimulation. It was something that was actually practiced in Europe, but not as much in the US. Anyway, I took that paper to my neurologist at Stanford, and she said, Kevin, she said, I've always thought you'd be a great candidate for deep brain stimulation, but it might be a little bit early. So, but she advocated for me. Anyway, long story short was I waited for about a year and didn't hear anything. And then all of a sudden they said, oh, you're scheduled in 2 months or 2 weeks, in fact. Anyway, I went through a panic at that point. It's like, should I? I second guessed everything. Anyway, let me tell you this, that action of having DBS and self-advocating for myself was probably the best thing that I ever did. I had a new lease on life. It was almost like I didn't have Parkinson's. I tell everyone I was on borrowed time now. In fact, it was daylight savings time on steroids. I went medication for 3 years. I was able to, join Rocksteady Boxing. I was cycling in the wine country. I was skiing in Vail. All these great things were happening to me. And I realized that would not have happened had I not advocated for myself. Now, advocacy goes in many stages, and there are many chapters of advocacy. And each one of these that I will talk to you about could be an hour conversation in themselves. There's scientific and clinical advocacy and volunteering for clinical trials. There's policy advocacy and political advocacy, where you're actually talking about pre-existing conditions. There's social advocacy, and there's even environmental advocacy. All the things that I become involved in, and very fortunate in my life to spend time with. The thing that I will tell you is be your best advocate, be strong, read and talk to the patients, and question. Don't be afraid to question. I personally volunteer for clinical trials because it keeps my hand in what's going on, and I'm just coming off almost a 6-year study on deep brain stimulation. Get involved, and others finally will come out and seek you out, right, to get more involved. A few years ago, I testified at the FDA on what it was like to live with Parkinson's. I've been called by congressmen to talk, on what it's like to live with the disease. I've provided patient testimony on EPA issues. These are all things that I never dreamed that I'd be doing in my life. But my most fun of advocacy is I get to talk to people like you. To me, this is something that is the most rewarding thing that I can do. I tell people there's never been a Parkinson's patient I didn't like. And in fact, it's something that's in our genes, right? We kind of now are bonded as a tribe. So the third part to my talk is emblazon each day with gratitude and humor. By now, in the last 15 minutes, I would say that most of you realize that I'm a pretty irreverent, self-deprecating person. Parkinson's is not a funny business, but it doesn't mean you can't have fun getting there. Think about what you're most grateful and start each day with meditation. I do this. I used to be a night person, now I'm a morning person, because I think about, turning now, instead of grapes into wine, as I would have in California, now living in Boulder, I'd turn lemons and limes into margaritas. I left my support base after 30 years and moved to a new town, not knowing really anyone other than Davis's wife, Connie and Polly, who you met earlier today. And a lot of people back home were saying, why are you doing that? Well, in case you haven't been to Boulder, it is Parkinson's nirvana. I mean, there are programs and resources everywhere I've turned. I just feel very fortunate to be here. And if you ever get a chance to come to Boulder and visit us, which I hope you will, come visit us at the Davis-Phinney offices. You'll see that there are programs galore because of the impact of this foundation. But the people in town here with Parkinson's are perhaps the most inspirational. If you see my Parkinson's spin class, you'd be amazed at this positive can-do attitude of the class. I mean, I would say that the 70 and 80-year-olds kick ass on the 40 and 50-year-old friends that I have in my life. I mean, everyone is just such an overachiever. I mean, even the dogs that they own run marathons, you know, here. My point is that you don't have to come to Boulder. Those resources exist and those people exist in your own town. So you find your own Boulder in Michigan because it's out there, as I've seen today, from the first presentations from Michigan Parkinson's Foundation. So in closing, I hope that maybe through this conversation with the faculty members and myself that you found some pearls of wisdom. I know every time I hear them, I learn something new. 8 months ago, you know, when I came here to Boulder, everything shut down with COVID-19. My friends all said, Kevin, come back to, you know, us in the Bay Area, we can take care of you. But I actually started to think, you know, I have everything here. I have online yoga, I have spin classes, I've got dance, I've got voice, and that all was before the working day started. I then work, you know, remotely for several hours, busier than I've ever been. And in the evenings, I have Zoom happy hours and even group workouts with friends. There's a certain irony in life. You know, Davis, who is now my neighbor, and before COVID hit, we used to carpool to all these classes. We were kind of like kids carpooling to Parkinson's school. Even once in a while, we would steal off an afternoon or a weekend and run out to this local ski resort and get 10 runs in. The dopamine rush from doing that was exquisite, let me tell you. Anyway, in those rides, Davis and I would always often talk about, you know, about guy things, e-bikes versus non-e-bikes. But more often than not, we would talk about the philosophy of living with Parkinson's. So when you have Parkinson's, your world becomes smaller. It's slower. It's harder to multitask. It's easy to become very self-absorbed. You start worrying about things like employment, paying the bills, you even lose your sense of smell sometimes. Now, does this sound familiar? These are all not just symptoms of Parkinson's. This is the world of COVID-19 that we're all living in today. But let me tell you the silver lining here. You all actually have a sneak preview on this. You've got a leg up on everyone else who is now catching up in that world. In fact, you've been training for this COVID-19 World Day all your diagnosed life. In any case, I'm going to end by saying thank you to many people. I want to thank the Davis-Phinney Foundation and the Michigan Parkinson's Foundation for helping sponsor this. The staff of those groups, they're fantastic. I'd like to thank the sponsors because they had the courage to continue allowing us to do this. And if you think that these programs are good, let them know. And especially thank you for the caregivers that are out there, because like in COVID, in Parkinson's, we really need you. And then thank you as the tribe members. We will overcome COVID-19 together. I mean, one day we will also have a cure or a Parkinson's-free world for our kids. But right now, we've got to live for today. And so I'm going to close with one final lyric of a song that an international support group in Parkinson's just introduced me to. It's a Bob Marley song, and it goes something like this. I'm not going to sing it because after 15 minutes, my voice is shot, but it goes like this. Don't worry about a thing, because everything's going to be all right. baby, don't worry about a thing, because everything's going to be all right. This is my message to you. I wish you all well and hope you'll find peace in your mindful pivot and have a wonderful journey. Thank you for your time.